Our last video on the channel was about baseball. We continue with that general theme today. Thanks for watching Window Read, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate your support. If you have comments about the stories or the channel, put them in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. Also, in case you missed the announcement, we will be putting a collection of the stories from Window Read into print version. So if you're an author who's been wanting to see your short story in print, send it to us at windowread@gmail.com right away. If your story is selected, we will read it here and put it in an upcoming book of Window Read short stories. Today, we get back to short stories after our last video about the Chicago Cubs baseball. However, I decided to continue along that general theme by pulling a story from my book, R.I.P. Chief Taylor. If you want to read more, you can pick up the book on Amazon. This story is about events that transpired after a Cubs game. It's called Ruckus on the Red Line by Glynn Amburgey. Sheriff Dave Harbinger and his wife Jan traveled to the Chicago area to catch a Cubs game. Dave's son Dee made the team. They took the opportunity to visit with Dave's brother Kent and his wife at their home in the western suburb of Naperville. Kent and his wife Duetta picked them up at the airport. They had a nice dinner and then went to Kent and Duetta's house for the night. The next day, the four of them took the train into Chicago. It was not what they would normally do to take in a Cubs game, since it's a real mess getting back on the train after a game. But since they were going out to dinner with Dee and Dave's other son, Chris, after the game, the rush would be over by the time they headed back into town. And besides, Jan had never ridden the commuter rail system. Metra, operating on the Burlington Northern Line from Naperville, dropped them off at Union Station on the west bank of the river in downtown Chicago. From there, it was about a 6-block walk toward the lake to the State Street subway entrance, where they could board the Red Line train to Wrigley Field. All decked out in Cubs wear, including a Harbinger Jr. jersey on each of them, it was no problem for anyone to guess where they were going as they walked down Adams Street. Dave wore his jersey untucked to hide the Sig Sauer P365 SAS automatic clipped inside his jeans in the small of his back. This 9mm weapon had become his favorite for when he was in civilian clothes. It is totally smooth with no catch points to snag on clothes if he needed to get it out in a hurry. It doesn't even have sights on the barrel or the back, since they are embedded inside the slide. And Being small and lightweight makes it the perfect weapon for concealment. When they got to their seats, about 10 rows up behind the third base dugout, the Cubs were on the field taking batting practice. Chris was already there. The ball game against Cincinnati was not what Dave, Kent, and the other Cubs fans had hoped for. Dee played well in the field, but was intentionally walked 3 times at the plate. The Reds only pitched to him if there was a runner on base, which only happened once. And he hit into a double play. The Cubs lost 1-0. After the game, they all went out to dinner. Dee had made reservations at a nice steakhouse on Halstead near the ballpark. They had a wonderful dinner, even though the talk of the ball game was not as upbeat as they would have liked. Still, Dee's career was going great, and they were glad to be able to share that with him. After dinner, Dee and Chris headed back to Dee's place. Dave, Jan, Kent, and DeWetta walked the few blocks to the L station to head back downtown. It was after 9 at night when they took their seats on the Red Line train heading south. Dave and Jan sat along the wall of the train, and Kent and DeWetta sat facing them on the first seat perpendicular to the wall. Dave was nearest the door in the middle of the train car. As was his custom, he quickly noted all the other passengers in the car. There were only 7 others, 2 single males of about 30 or so on each end of the car, 1 older male directly on the other side of the door, and 2 couples. One couple was older and sat facing them across the aisle near the far end of the car to Dave's left. The other couple was also across the aisle, but in the middle of the car on the opposite side of the doors. Dave's cop mind saw no threat in anyone in the car except for the couple opposite them. They were both in their early to mid-20s. She had long black and blonde streaked hair, lots of jewelry, and a diamond in the side of her nose. She wore cut-off jeans and a bright green top with a small red and yellow pattern similar to flowers. Her shoes were sandals and her feet were dirty. She was staring at a cell phone. Her partner was a big guy. Even though he was sitting, Dave judged him to be well over 6 feet, maybe 6'5". His day-old bearded face had signs of scars. He didn't have a bodybuilder body, but was in good shape and would tip the scale at over 240. His black ball cap was turned backwards. He wore a blue and green plaid shirt with the sleeves cut off at the shoulders. His arms rippled with muscles. His shirt was not tucked in his jeans and was unbuttoned, showing a blue sleeveless tee underneath. He had on high-top basketball shoes, only partly laced. The item that most attracted Dave's attention was meant to be hidden, and it almost was. Only the slightest hint of silver could be seen peeking out from inside of the big guy's plaid shirt. Dave recognized it as possibly the butt end of a pistol stuck down into his waistband. The guy had his head down and his arms crossed over his belly. As the train started moving, there was a noise at the far end of the car to Dave's left. He recognized it as the door of the next car closing. He looked and saw a face looking into the car through the window of the door. The hat with the checkerboard band told him it was a Chicago policeman. As the cop came into the car, he did the same review of the car occupants that Dave had done, with the same result. He fixed his gaze on the plaid shirt guy. At the same instant, plaid shirt guy's girl looked very quickly from her phone to the cop and back to her phone. She whispered something, too low for anyone but Plaid Shirt to hear. Plaid Shirt moved his head up and very slightly to the right to glance in the direction of Chicago's finest. He slowly turned back to the left, raising his left hand to rub his forehead as if he had a headache. But as his left hand went up, his right hand went down to his waistband inside the plaid shirt. Dave shifted his weight to his right, toward Jan, as his right hand slid behind him. His hand grasped the Sig Sauer. He waited and watched the cop walk through the train car. The patrolman seemed to notice no one in the car except for Plaid Shirt. Although he didn't look directly at him as he walked by, Dave could tell his sole focus was right there. Plaid Shirt still rubbed his head as he looked at the floor. After the officer had walked by, the black ball cap came slowly up and followed him. Dave saw his eyes for the first time as they stared into the back of the cop. The brow above the cold steel eyes furrowed with hate. The cop was about halfway between Dave and the other door when Plaid Shirt made his move. He quietly moved toward the cop as he pulled the pistol out from under his shirt. It appeared to be a .38 caliber revolver. He held it at a 90-degree angle from the norm as he brought it up and pointed it at the back of the cop's head. When Plaid Shirt had passed him, Dave went into action. In one fluid motion, he got up behind Plaid Shirt with the 9mm pointed at his back. But as Dave moved, so did Plaid Shirt's girl, straight toward Dave. In the next instant, everything happened at once. As Dave saw the tendon for the first finger of Plaid Shirt's right hand start to draw the trigger of the .38, he introduced a bullet from the Sig Sauer into the right shoulder blade of the big man. This caused the .38 to jerk upward as the bullet left the barrel, missing its mark. The bullet just grazed the top of the cop's head. The cop's hat went flying up toward the ceiling of the train car as it followed the bullet. That all happened milliseconds after Plaid Shirt's girl lunged at Dave. But instead of stopping him, she was met by Jan's right hand in a forceful chop across the bridge of the nose, sending her onto the floor of the train car. Before she had hit the floor, Kent was moving to make sure she stayed down. Meanwhile, Plaid Shirt was pivoting to his right and falling to the floor. Dave grabbed his gun hand and kept the gun pointed up. Plaid Shirt squeezed off another round as he fell. The cop had ducked down and to the left. He turned to his right and also grabbed the assailant's gun hand. As Plaid Shirt hit the floor of the train car, he had Dave and the cop on top of him, holding him down and pulling the .38 out of his grasp. Together, they rolled him over onto his stomach, and the cop slapped handcuffs on him as he protested and bled. Dave pulled his shield out of his pocket. He flashed it in the direction of the officer as he radioed in. "Shots fired! Suspect down!" the radio call began. Dave looked back for the first time to the area where he had been seated. He saw Plaid Shirt's girl on the floor with a bloody nose. Jan and Kent were holding her down. "Thanks," the cop said to Dave. Other than the profane protests of the perp, not a single word had been spoken by anyone during the entire ordeal until that point. "What happened here?" Dave asked as he got back over to Jan. "Your lady took this girl out when she tried to stop you," Kent offered. "She sure packs a punch for a pregnant judge." "You okay?" Dave asked, concerned. "Sure," Jan said, sheepishly. "You know how jealous I am. When I saw her going for you, I just snapped." "You know, you could be looking at an assault charge." "Well, if it comes to my court, I'll be fair and impartial." The train was held at the next station. No one was allowed to leave until the police had obtained statements and contact information from everyone on the train. Plaid Shirt and his girlfriend were taken to the hospital under guard. The police officer was also taken to the hospital, although the assessment of the paramedics was that his injury was no more than a scratch. Because it was on the head, it was best to have it looked at by the hospital staff. Dave, Jan, and Kent were asked to go to the police station for further interviews. They were transported in 2 squad cars along with Duetta. Once at the station house, they were each interviewed separately by an officer who took their statements of what occurred on the train. When Dave finished his statement, he was escorted into an office. As he entered, the man behind the desk got up and approached him. "I'm Dave Wessel, head of investigations for this precinct," the captain said. "It's an honor to meet you, sir." He motioned to one of the chairs in front of his desk. He returned to his high-backed desk chair. The nameplate on the front of the desk read, "Captain David Dean Wessel." The conversation went right into baseball and how much the entire police force appreciated what D was doing for the Cubs. After a few minutes, it shifted to the trouble on the train. "We appreciate your help, Sheriff. That is one bad dude you took out there. We've been on him for years, but have never been able to get him in the act as you did tonight. Now we can put him away for a long time." "I was just doing what needed to be done, Captain." "What you did was stop an execution and bring down one of the leaders of a gang. That cop worked in our organized crime unit for several years. We had to move him to the L duty after we picked up word on the street that there was a contract out on him. He was involved in a drug bust about a year ago and killed the brother of the guy you shot." "So, it was revenge." "That's our read. We thought he was the guy who put the contract out, but certainly didn't think he would attempt it himself. It's just a good thing you were there and ready to take action. I'm just glad I was paying attention. So are we. We can't thank you enough. My guys tell me we have everything we need from you for now. There may be more questions, but if so, we can do that by phone. The state's attorney's office will most likely want you and your wife to come back for the trial. They always like to have a judge and a sheriff as witnesses. I don't think that will be a problem, but it would be nice if the trial is during ball season, around a stretch of home games. If you could work that out. Okay, I'll make sure the court knows of your request, Wessel laughed. Now, just sit tight for a second while I get someone to take you guys home. The captain picked up his phone and started punching buttons. Some months later, Dave, Jan, and Kent testified for the state in the trial of Plaid Shirt and his girlfriend. Plaid Shirt was found guilty of the attempted murder of a police officer and received 35 years without parole. His girlfriend was found guilty of accessory to attempted murder of a police officer and was sentenced to 15 years.